All right, welcome to another Ember Weekend. I'm Jonathan Jackson.
And I'm Chase McCarthy.
And we are broadcasting from all over the place. I'm a little rusty on this. I'm up in Providence, and you're in Round Rock.
In Round Rock.
Yes, I got it right. Okay, that's awesome. And we are joined today by a special guest, Robert Jackson, and he's going to talk to us about all things Ember. How you doing, Rob?
Hello. Doing well.
All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is named args, which is RFC 276. What can you tell us about this, Rob?
This RFC brings the usage of what we're calling named args into template land. Now, just to be clear, this RFC landed a while ago and is released and included in Ember 3.2, which has been out for a while now. And basically what happens is any arguments you pass into your component invocation, like if you invoke some component and you pass post equals, some value, inside the component, you can use curly at sign post, and that'll reference the argument passed to you. On its own, it doesn't seem terribly big, but for those of you that have been around in the sort of space for a while, way back in Ember 1.13, we added this thing called adders, and it was adders dot, a very similar concept, only you'd have adders dot thing passed to you. And this is hopefully the final nail in the coffin of the adders thing. And effectively what the idea is, in a template, when you're looking at a component template and you see curly at sign some name, you can effectively know that nothing is being manipulated in the component's JS around that thing, because you're by saying at foo or at post or at whatever, you're saying literally the exact thing passed to me, put it here. Or pass it on to some other invocation or whatever you're doing with it. Whereas if you had just done curly post in the example that I gave before, you could totally have a computed property for post. You could have manipulated it in your init or your did receive adders or any of those hooks. So that's one really nice side effect.
Yeah,
right?
so not to belabor the point of this.adders, but what were the main reasons why this.adders, that solution didn't actually work? Was it just not fully fleshed out, or?
Yeah, so there were a few problems. The first, and in my mind, the biggest one, is just that at the time, during 1.13 cycle, we were trying to prepare for 2.0. We thought that we had nailed the sort of Glimmer component concept at the time. So we went to 1.13 beta 1. I think we actually included by default angle bracket invocation and the adder stuff. And what we found out was that we had lots of problems. For example, at that time, the engine that we were using, which was then called HTML bars, but now we refer to that engine as Glimmer version 1, it basically doesn't fundamentally support two-way binding. And therefore, what that meant was for us to effectively add two-way binding, which is pretty important, especially for the 1.x era Ember apps.
Right.
What we did to add that was basically in adders, when you would access it, you would have either a plain value when it was read-only, or this mutable cell thing. I'm doing air quotes you cannot see. But the mutable cell thing effectively had a value property and an update method. So the problem was at that time, so the reason adders wasn't useful at that point was largely because magically underneath the hood, adders meant a thing, and the rendering engine would automatically unwrap this mutable cell deal. But if you were to access it in the component.js, you'd see this mutable cell. But you'd only see the mutable cell if the value passed to you was read-write. So if someone did a read-only argument and passed it to you, then you wouldn't have it wrapped. And it was massively confusing. When do you have this wrapped value? When do you not have the wrapped value? Are you really supposed to be mutating in this.adders? All that stuff, right? Those were the big realm of problems. So this feature that we're talking about now, the named args, is basically an iteration forward from the original idea of adders. This is not accessible in the component.js. This is only the at foo is only accessible in the templates, which means that Glimmer VM itself can do some optimizations. It doesn't have to worry about asking the component for the value. It's not getting the value from the component. It's just hey, I was passed this. I know what it is. I'm going to render it. So that's nice. But it also nicely sidesteps that weird mutable thing, right? Now, it's totally possible that in the future we will bring a thing like args into component space. but it's unlike, like, that'll be another RFC. That's not introduced here. That's totally speculative thing. That concept does exist in the Glimmer component world, like the standalone Glimmer.js apps. When they have args, they use them like at foo, just like this RFC is talking about, and they also have available in their JS this.args. They're not allowed to mutate that. That's basically a read-only thing, but it is available. But again, that's like fodder for a future RFC. That's something we're going to probably think about down the line.
Cool.
Okay, awesome. So these things are one way by default then. That's correct?
Yes, though only at the root. So, for example, if you did an input, like curly input, and the value equals at post.title or something, that should work, right? Like, that's supposed to work. It's just no different than doing any of the mutation, right? So it's not read-only, like, all the way down. It's just the top level thing is read-only.
Right. Okay. And the other thing I thought was interesting about this is that it seemed like it was a pretty simple change to Ember, because it says it was baked into Glimmer VM already, and all it was really just removing this AST transform that was like specifically disallowing this.
Yeah, so ironically, there were two AST transform. One that we had to make sure ran first would parse your templates to see if you had this @ sign, and it would throw an error if you had like a named arg. Then a later AST transform that all of them run during the compilation of every single template. Later in the cycle, we literally transformed curly adders.foo into @foo. So while we forbade you from doing @foo, we internally leveraged the system that already had existed in Glimmer VM for quite some time. Like, since well before, like, at least 2.10, at least Ember 2.10. Like, the system has existed for having access to the thing past you, essentially.
Awesome. Pretty cool.
When did those transforms happen? I mean, I would expect those to happen at build time.
During build time, when you compile a template, like, all templates go through, like, basically any add-on or app has Ember CLI HTML bars as a dependency. That thing then effectively uses Ember's template compiler to compile down the templates from handlebars to what amounts to JavaScript, but is basically JSON data structures. That's done at build time. The AST transforms in here are actually built into Ember. Now, it is possible for add-ons to add their own AST transforms. That's not what we're talking about. We're saying that it's just these are pre-baked into Ember. A decent number of AST transforms exist in Ember just to give good feedback about mistakes and errors that exist in a template. For example, if we give runtime errors or deprecations, if you will, we lose completely any knowledge of the exact line number and column number and file name that had the, like, whatever the problem was. Whereas if we do it in these AST transforms, they happen at build time, so we can give really detailed, like, line 1, column 5.
Right.
Like, you can't use this symbol, right? So whenever possible, we try to add either, like, if we're going to add a deprecation that involves template stuff, we try to make sure to be able to get it into, like, an AST transform level where we can literally tell you exactly where in your template it was.
Okay, so if I'm reading that correctly or understanding that and tracking, that means that the transforms happen at build time. So the optimizations you mentioned that the Glimmer VM can do, because it knows that there are some guarantees about the @ sign in a template, we were already getting those in previous versions of Ember. It's just now we're allowing that to kind of take place in user space. So it's really just kind of...
So we were only getting the optimizations if you're literally... The only thing we automatically optimized was adders.foo. Right? So if you literally had curly attrs dot post or something in your template, that's what was
okay.
For. Because the problem is, and this is another RFC that isn't on our list to talk about today, but we should totally go dive into it at some point. The problem is that we implicitly look at this, like, if you have curly foo, you can't tell if that was an argument passed to you or if that is a property on the component instance or a helper invocation, right? Like, there's actually no way to disambiguate that in the Glimmer VM or as a human reading the template. So that's totally another thing. There's a whole other RFC that recently emerged around that. But the reason we can't do the optimization in that case is because you're totally allowed to, in your components init, mutate some value, calculate some, like, compound value or something, and set it on this, and then use that in the template. That's a very common case, right? Or a CP or any number of things, right? So by having this named args, like the @ sign in the template, you're basically saying, hey, I don't have any shenanigans going on in the JS, and I am just using what was passed to me. Now, if you combine this with another even another RFC that landed recently, which is the template-only Glimmer Components RFC. This lets you use arguments to a component that has no JavaScript, so it doesn't have the ability to fall back to that this lookup, and just use it. So those things combined are ultimately going to let us finally, hopefully, deprecate partial completely. But that'll be another RFC, don't worry.
Okay.
We haven't written that one yet. That's just that the long-term plan. My personal long-term plan is like a big bonfire, and we'll throw some partials into it.
I got you. We've talked about partials quite a bit on this show. I think it actually yielded a few decent conversations, but I think the general prevailing thought of at least me is that partials tend to be really hard to refactor away from, and they shouldn't really be used, right?
Yeah. I mean, just the fact that they basically assume all the context of where they're invoked.
Right.
What it means is they're generally not reusable because they assume way more about their invocation site than a reusable thing should. It also means they have basically no API. Like, effectively, you can think of it as a component, right? Hey, I'm rendering this other template, sip it, and put it here. But it's a component, quote unquote, with no API. Like, you don't pass it anything. It just magically sees whatever's available. It's quite literally eval. Like, you don't just take random strings of possible JavaScript and eval them in your JS code either.
Right.
Like, that's exactly what's happening here. So, yeah. Anyways, but there are upsides too, right? Like, it's very nice to be able to say, hey, I can copy this random HTML snippet. Like, say, imagine something with no dynamic bits, something that's like an SVG icon or something, and you don't want to have to literally paste it in every place you might want to render that thing. That's a not horrible use case, right? You don't need a component. There's no JS. There's no dynamism. And until recently, until that template-only Glimmer Components feature landed, there was no way to even have something that was effectively outer HTML, where the root element was just in the template, just like Glimmer components are. So there were things that partials provided that were a little bit more annoying to do without. Like to do the same sort of thing in a component land, you'd have to say like tag name blank with a component JS and that kind of stuff, right? So,
right.
Anyways, so we're just slowly trying to chip away at what those remaining feature sets are, and then hopefully make a nice little refactoring tool to help refactor away from remaining partial usage.
Cool.
One other thing about the named args, I forgot to mention earlier. So because the VM has had support for this for so long, I actually wrote a polyfill that allows add-ons to start using the @foo syntax immediately, or apps, and it works back to Ember 2.10. So if you depend on this polyfill, this is Ember named arguments polyfill. It is the NPM package name. It just makes it work all the way back to a long time ago, basically.
Cool.
Pretty cool.
I wonder how that works. Are you like removing the transform then?
No, so a magician never tells us secrets.
Okay, all right.
No, so basically what I'm doing is I'm transforming the @ was a compile time error before, like that since Ember 2.10 at least. And that was done by an AST transform. So I insert another AST transform ahead of that one that transforms it to adders dot.
Yeah.
And then to avoid the error. And then the third AST transform that I already mentioned earlier transforms anything with adders dot into thing name.
Awesome.
So yes.
That's great. That's great.
And the other thing that's nice is like it properly detects what Ember version has. Like, if it doesn't need to exist, it literally does nothing. Like, it doesn't even inject the AST transform if your Ember version is new enough to not need it, basically.
Right.
Pretty cool.
So it's like, it's no cost. It's like, it only does the thing if it has to, and when it doesn't need it, it doesn't need it. Which is why it's great for add-ons. Like, if you have an add-on and you just want to, so my personal goal is that add-ons can always author their templates in the most modern style. And so that would be, this would allow that, right? Because I think people look to the add-on templates to know what to do or how to do things.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we're going to move on to the next RFC, which is RFC 213, and this is custom components. This one was pretty cool. I really like this component manager type that's being introduced.
This particular RFC is the sort of foot in the door, the wedge in the door to land like the thing we've talked about for a long time, which is Glimmer components in Ember, but it does it in a way that lets anyone add custom component types. Like, for example, today on current Canary builds, which is what will ultimately be Ember 3.4, you could totally author a a component. You can have your own component manager. You can have your own component base class that isn't Ember.component or derived from Ember component at all. Hell, it doesn't even have to be derived from Ember.object. You could just have it be a native ES class, and you could have it have properties similar to Ember component does. Like you could have hooks that you want. You can have it get arguments passed into it and all that stuff. And you control lots of those details in the component manager's own hooks. So you can decide what you want to do. You can decide whether you wanted the component to have, like, this adders passed into it in construction time, or args, or any number of possible things, right? Which is really neat and very abstract. So it's a little bit difficult to talk about. But the long-term goal is that we can design and develop custom component types that have their own behaviors that are independent of the core framework, as long as they can be implemented in terms of the hooks introduced here.
Yeah, so can you go into a little bit of how the capabilities and versioning works? Because I saw a little bit about how it looks like components are kind of going to be split apart into multiple different capabilities that kind of break apart the existing hooks we know about, like destroy component.
So the idea is you would author a component manager, and that component manager declares what capabilities it's coded to. So that, for example, if you release a component manager today for 3.4, it's going to assume that all of the methods that are called in whatever the current exact API is will be what your thing is coded to. Now, if in a future version of Ember, like say we go through another RFC cycle, we add more features, more possibilities that are possible that you can do. We know what your manager expects, and we can polyfill back to that version as needed, right? So, for example, one thing that the current manager system does is during the create component hook, it passes you a POJO that has all of the named arguments and positional arguments values in it. Now, as you can imagine, pulling on all the values is non-trivial, and sometimes you might write a component that doesn't need to read all the values. Maybe it only needs to read the first one. Like, imagine you're writing if, and you want to short circuit, and you want to evaluate the later arguments, right? Mm-hmm. Today, you totally can't do that. You can't do that with a helper. You can't do that with a component. You just can't, right? But imagine this future world where we write another RFC and add the capability to lazily evaluate the values, right? So if we did that, you would have to opt into it. And when you opt into it, you'd specify the capabilities of that version. And in this case, it may even be an optional capability where you would say, lazy reification, or I don't know pick some good name. Words are hard, but like some name for the feature, right? And you would opt into it, and we can basically iterate forward in this component manager API, supporting existing component managers, but still adding capabilities to get lower level and like speed, performance related things, that kind of stuff. Like you could also imagine, like, we might need to add some features for like component pooling. Like, for example, if you like liquid fire and smoke and mirrors, vertical collection, those things all have this component recycling system. And you could imagine maybe we could figure out some special features those things would need to know to call hooks or to have access to when a thing is recycled, for example. Right. That is an example, I think, in the RFC, though I personally think we will need more functionality to really do that system justice, but it's down that path.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other ones that was in here was like the templateless component was in here as an example. Mm-hmm. It's super simple.
You mean the JS like component, template only?
Yeah, template only component.
Yeah. It's like literally just when the hook for like get context or get self, I can't remember what the name of the hook is, but when that's called, you just return null, and boom, now you have curly this inside that template is just nothing.
Right, and it seems like that's how like partials would be implemented. Would be that you would just return whatever the context of the thing that called you.
Yes, though unfortunately, partials have lots of other problems because they're eval, right? It's not that there is no this; it's that there is the this from the caller site, and in the manager system, you don't have access. You don't know the caller context. Like, you don't know the current invocation site's this.
Right. You'd have to say something like partial this or something, or give it access.
Now, under the hood, this manager system is effectively what is implemented and is used in Ember 2.10 plus, but we use a much more privileged version because some of the capabilities that are needed for like features like curly render or partial are just not possible in this more limited initial RFC API. Now, in the long run, we could probably add those features to the public version as well. But the idea was like get the foot in the door, start the process of making it possible to author these things in add-on space, in userland. And then we can iterate and we can test and we can experiment together, basically.
And then the other thing I read in here was that add-on authors can actually support multiple different capabilities from different versions, and then those get compiled out to be just the version you actually need when you build, right?
Yep. So there is a really great add-on that Chris Garrett works on called Ember Compatibility Helpers. And when we were going through this RFC, I was also working on some of these crazy AST transforms that I was doing, and it was getting to be pretty annoying to include code for each branch of different supported version, both from a bloat perspective and also reasoning about the code becomes hard. What Ember Compatibility Helpers does is it gives you a import, and you can import from Ember Compatibility Helpers, like GTE from Ember Compatibility Helpers, and you can say, like, if greater than 2.10, do this block. And that conditional is replaced with the literal true or false value. So when minification happens, the conditions that are falsy get completely removed from the code, right? So you can, as an author, you can just write your code and just have either a case statement or something like that, or a couple of ifs, and author how you want, and then not worry about shipping code for users that aren't using, like, say, Ember 3.1 or Ember 2.10 or something, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
The thing is that it is intentionally a very low-level primitive, right? Like,
Sure.
It is not a thing apps are going to do almost, like, I would be very surprised if apps did this, right? It's like, super duper, like, add-ons will provide a thing. Like, you can imagine maybe Liquid Fire provides a custom component that is like their base class for their specially transition-y, magical, saucy stuff.
Right.
Like, I don't know. It's a little hand-wavy, obviously, but, like, you can imagine something like that, right? You could also think, like, this is exactly how we intend to introduce Glimmer components into Ember without landing like an official RFC, right? So Glimmer components can continue to experiment in Ember apps without needing the full RFC process, and we can continue to experiment so we can avoid the issues that we had in Ember 1.13, right?
Right.
So, like, in 1.13, we thought we were done. We thought we had it all planned, but that was like a sort of, I guess you could call it like a waterfall session, right? Like, where we designed all the features, we went and did the implementation, and then here we go. And it turns out we were very wrong in lots of places. So instead, we want to get things workable so that they can be experimented on, like, outside in real world, right? Like, there's like about like way more smart people in the Ember ecosystem than me, and I want to know what they think. I want to know what their ideas are, and so we're like, the goal here is just to get this in people's hands so we can start making it better.
The next RFC we're going to talk about is RFC 3.1.1, or angle bracket invocation, which I suppose this is Glimmer components, Rob? Is that true? Or is this just the invocation?
It's just the invocation side. It changes, like, the goal of this RFC is to change absolutely nothing about the thing you're invoking. You're only changing the invocation site, basically.
Okay, right.
So now we add capabilities to the thing you invoke, but the goal is, this is just regular Ember components. Like, it doesn't require a new paradigm. It doesn't require you to change the way you think about the world. It's just what you already know. This is regular Ember components being invoked with angle brackets, basically.
Cool. Could you walk me through what I believe it is now known as Splattributes? I feel like that's the thing that I'm most interested in it, and I also like the name. Yeah, so to talk about Splattributes, you have to talk about probably the major difference between angle bracket invocation and curly invocation, and that's the fact that, outside that you use angles instead of curlies, and that's that for arguments to the component you're invoking, you prefix those arguments with @. So if you are passing a user argument into a component, you would say @user equals curly some value. Whereas if you want to add some decoration to that thing's root element or main element, you would not prefix it with an @ sign, and that is an attribute, right? So the difference is things that start with an @ sign are arguments that you're passing to the component, and it can do whatever it pleases with the value. Like, it's just a value that it can use inside of its own template. It can use curly @user inside its JavaScript space, depending on its component manager. It can use this.user or this.args.user or whatever its component manager interface is, and like that goes to town, right? But the attributes things that aren't prefixed with an @ sign,
That's a whole new category. That's a whole new thing. We don't have that today, right? In curly invocation, everything is an argument. We only can have the ability to pass arguments. We can't differentiate between what's an argument and what's intended to be an attribute. The goal of attributes is that the things you pass there, like say you pass a class or data test foo, data foo or something, right? Or test attribute or something like that. You can pass it, and you know that attribute is going to be set on the element, the root element of the component, without the component itself having to add special magical attribute bindings for each possible value, right? This is like a really common problem for people authoring generic components for reuse, especially add-on authors, where like you end up seeing a list of attribute bindings these folks have to write. It's like 20, 30, 40 attributes that they like. Everybody PRs their own pet attribute because they just need this thing to be bound. And this whole thing makes that go away, right? So now at the invocation site, you can say, hey, use these attributes on the root element, and it just happens automatically. You don't have to do anything. Now, on the inside of the component template, the thing you're invoking, you can use ... attributes to say, hey, put the attributes here also, right? So you can control, like say you're implementing a custom each sort of thing that has some decoration, like kicks off an OL or something, and then inside you're looping over the items, and you want each item to also have those same attributes. In those LIs, I guess, you would be able to say ... attributes, and it would put them in each of those cases as well.
Very cool.
So it seems like the major use case for this is that if you have you have a component list template, right? And you need that handle to put into the root element, right?
Yes. So if you have a component list template, and that template is not a sort of template-only Glimmer component, which is one of the RFCs we talked about before, or we referred to before. The templates of those are outer HTML, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. So the actual root element is in the template. But normal Ember components, you'd say, tag name blank, or you'd have to say tag name blank to do that, right? But yeah, exactly. So if you have a template and you want to customize a class or something, you don't want to have to go, and now that you've added, you want to add a custom class, now you'd have to make a new JS file, add some special attribute bindings, not for class, but some other props, basically, right? But yes, that's exactly the point, right? And also, you don't want to have to remember every possible sort of area role, for example, right? There's a lot of them, right? And you may not imagine that your component's being invoked in certain cases where you need all of them, but who knows, right? People use your stuff however. So it's just really nice to put directly in the hands of the app author, if you will, what attributes end up being here.
The other thing that looked a little interesting here was that this actually simplifies, I guess, I don't know what you really call that, but if you are doing a contextual component, apparently there was some bug before that I wasn't even aware of, where if you could potentially not be able to render a contextual component because you didn't have a dot, and there was some kind of rule that you had to have a dot. And this actually would ease that rule because of the syntax makes it more clear what's happening, right?
Yep, exactly. So previously there's been bugs, but the dot rule existed specifically to make it so that you couldn't just curly invoke any random property and look up everything that you specify there. So if you have a component named foobar and you did curly foobar, are we supposed to look up foobar as a local property before we go and resolve the component? That's madness, right? That's becomes really difficult to manage and think about. So that's what the dot rule was supposed to provide. If you wanted to look up the local property, you'd say this dot foobar, but otherwise we're going to assume you meant, hey, go invoke this component. But there was a bug where that wasn't true in certain Ember versions. So anyways, this removes the dot rule completely, and it lets you use, you can use with or each or something and yield out effectively a contextual component and just invoke it with angle brackets directly.
Yeah, I think the reason why I never came across this was that every example of contextual components I've ever seen, you yield some object that has multiple named components.
Right.
And even if I only did one, I always end up following that practice just because it seemed like a best practice kind of thing. It was a pattern I'd always seen. And I guess that is actually what was, it was trying to beat this. It was trying to resolve this problem.
Yep, exactly. And I think it seems like I have been in training sessions where folks are like, why do I have to yield this object? I only have one value. Why can't I just yield the value and render it on the outside? And it's actually it's a really crazy trap to fall into, right? doesn't seem different to you. It doesn't seem different to me even, right? It's just there's this arbitrary rule, and that's the way it works. So that fixes this. Another nice thing is that this RFC allows single word component names. No longer you have to come up with some arbitrary prefix or two words where one word makes more sense.
Or
just
prefix
use the
with
one
X.
word.
That's the best one.
Yeah.
Yes, X dash foo. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So you don't need to do that anymore. You just invoke it with angle brackets and capital letters, like essentially, I don't know, Pascal case, I don't know, initial caps, basically. And then we know to go and resolve that, basically.
Yeah, and it also, just looking at it, it makes syntax highlighting is so much easier, and it's so much easier to understand. I think it was put here something like the dynamic parts are really stand out, like the each loops and things like that. The parts that are actually doing some kind of computation and the parts that are templates look like HTML.
Yep. And another thing that I really enjoy is like if you're passing an attribute or a compound value, you can just use the same techniques you would use in HTML, which is like have a quote and put curly curly, some value, close curly curly, a space, some other thing. Whereas before, if you want to do that in a component invocation, you'd have to use like sub expressions like concat and the like manual, like you're basically like programming in the template to concat all the stuff together, which is like really annoying.
Yeah, definitely much easier to read and reason about.
Yeah, this is super cool.
Now, just like so there's some caveats or some issues that we had to iron out as through the process, and one is that the component names you invoke are, like I said, initial caps. So it has to start with the first capital letter, basically, and we basically translate that to dasherized on the file system. So the files on disk don't move. They're still in the same location. Like if you had a foo bar component, it's still foo hyphen bar, but you would invoke it with capital F, capital B, no hyphen, right? The reason that's important is because we want it to be very interchangeable between curly invocation and angle bracket invocation. The only difference between the two is just the added capability of being able to pass attributes as well as arguments, right? So it was really, really important that you can interop between the two worlds. As a matter of fact, it was so important that I also wrote a polyfill for this one, and that works back to Ember 2.10 as well. And it basically lets app authors or add-on authors use this new syntax, initial caps, the whole thing, including attributes, to invoke components from their add-ons or apps, even if they're not using the most recent versions of Ember. And this is basically it was a ploy on my part to get more people testing the feature and using the feature earlier, basically. So we've had a bunch of positive results, lots of various like bug fixes and tweaks and understanding corrections and whatnot. This feature, as well as custom components that we just talked about a moment ago, those features are both enabled in what is currently Ember Master, which will become Ember 3.4 as the train cycle flows down the hill. So I think combined, all of these things together, named args, custom components, angle bracket, invocation, really combine to a really nice new mentality for authoring templates. And I don't know, I'm really excited about moving forward and having these things for use in my normal apps that aren't going to use Canary.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like this is going to make half of the files, half the component files I write go away, because many times I don't even need a component file. Really, I have no real logic. And if I do, it's like I'm just trying to change the tag name or something very simple. It's very nice to do this in a template. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And frankly, it feels like that's how it should have been, right? Like it's like we don't need two ways to describe HTML, if you will, right? Like we don't need the JS API for the root element and a whole other API like the handlebars for the rest of the stuff. It's super confusing to explain that.
Yeah, definitely. And one other thing is with class here, the example that was given, they show class being passed into some angle bracket. Is that handled specially inside of attributes?
Yeah. So there's a couple of properties around. Basically, there's custom merging strategies here. So class is merged, but everything else is clobbered, basically. So if you pass any attribute from the invocation site that the component itself internally also specifies, your value clobbers their value, basically. Like it trumps the internal value. But class was considered special, right? So we merge those values, right? So effectively, like whatever you pass is added to the class value of the inside. In the long term, I personally would love to see us do something similar with style, but I think that is quite a bit further off. That is a whole nother like area of problems that I don't have time to dig into right now. But like it's effectively similar, right? Like you can imagine merging styles similarly to how you can merge classes. It's just there's also lots of caveats around security and whatnot to deal with that aren't true in the class space.
Definitely.
Right.
Okay, so that's all the time we have this week, although apparently we have another 3 or 4 RFCs to talk about coming up. So hopefully we'll get those on the book soon. Thanks, Rob, for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me. It's great.
All right, and so we will see you again sometime in the future.